What if the last $10 in your pocket had the power to completely change your future? Imagine being a struggling teenager with almost nothing to your name, and then making a decision that most people would call foolish. A decision to give away your very last $10 to a complete stranger. No reward, no expectations, no guarantee that you would ever see that person again. But what if 10 years later, that single act of kindness came back in a way you could never imagine? Today's story is about one small choice that created a ripple effect across an entire decade. Stay with me until the very end, because the surprise waiting 10 years later is something that will remind you that kindness never truly disappears. Ethan was only 16 years old, but life had already taught him lessons that many adults spend decades trying to understand. He lived with his mother in a small apartment on the edge of town. Ever since his father had left years earlier, things had never been easy. His mother worked long hours at a local laundry service, often returning home exhausted, yet the bills seemed to grow faster than the money coming in. Ethan watched her struggle every day. He saw the worry in her eyes whenever rent was due. He noticed how she skipped meals sometimes, pretending she wasn't hungry so there would be enough food for him. Those experiences changed him. While most teenagers worried about new clothes, video games, or weekend plans, Ethan worried about keeping the lights on and helping his mother make it through another month. To contribute however he could, Ethan worked after school at a small grocery store. The pay wasn't much, but every dollar mattered. He saved carefully and avoided spending money unless it was absolutely necessary. One particular Friday afternoon, after receiving his weekly pay, he found himself with exactly $10 left in his pocket. It wasn't extra money. It wasn't spending money. It was all he had until the following week. He planned to use it for bus rides and lunches at school. Without that $10, the next few days would be much more difficult. The sky was gray as Ethan walked home through the rain. The streets were nearly empty, and most people hurried past with umbrellas over their heads. As he approached an old bus stop, something caught his attention. Sitting alone on a weathered bench was a man who looked completely defeated. His clothes were soaked from the rain. His hands trembled slightly from the cold. He stared at the ground as if he had nowhere to go and no one to turn to. Most people walked past without looking at him. Some glanced briefly before continuing on their way. Ethan slowed down. For a moment he considered doing what everyone else was doing. After all, he had his own problems. He barely had enough money for himself. He wasn't responsible for fixing a stranger's life. Yet something about the man's expression stopped him. It wasn't just hunger or exhaustion. It was hopelessness. Ethan recognized that look because he had seen something similar on his mother's face during their hardest times. Gathering his courage, Ethan walked over and asked if the man was okay. The stranger looked surprised that someone had stopped. After a brief conversation, Ethan learned that the man had traveled to the city looking for work. A series of unfortunate events had left him stranded with no money, no food, and nowhere to stay. He hadn't eaten since the previous day. As the man spoke, Ethan felt a battle taking place inside his mind. One voice reminded him how much he needed that $10. Another voice told him that this man needed it even more. He reached into his pocket and felt the crumpled bill. It represented security. It represented meals and transportation for the coming days. Giving it away would create problems for him. Yet as he looked at the stranger sitting alone in the rain, Ethan realized that kindness is often most meaningful when it costs something. Without allowing himself time to change his mind, he pulled out the $10 and placed it in the man's hand. The stranger stared at the money in disbelief. His eyes widened, and for a moment he seemed unable to speak. Ethan simply smiled and told him to buy something warm to eat. The man tried to refuse at first, insisting that Ethan needed it more, but Ethan gently encouraged him to accept it. As he walked away through the rain, he had no idea that this simple decision would become one of the most important moments of his entire life. As Ethan continued walking home through the rain, he couldn't stop thinking about what he had just done. The $10 was gone. The money he had planned to use for bus rides and lunch over the next several days now belonged to a complete stranger. For a brief moment, doubt began creeping into his mind. He wondered if he had made a mistake. He wondered how he would explain it to his mother if she asked. Yet deep inside, there was also a strange sense of peace. The kind of peace that comes from knowing you followed your heart, even when logic told you to do something else. The following week was not easy. Without that money, Ethan had to walk long distances instead of taking the bus. Some days he skipped lunch at school to save what little he had left. His friends occasionally noticed but assumed he simply wasn't hungry. Ethan never told anyone about the stranger at the bus stop. He never mentioned the $10. He didn't share the story because he wasn't looking for praise or recognition. In his mind, helping someone was simply the right thing to do. The act itself was enough. As the weeks turned into months, the memory of that rainy afternoon slowly faded into the background of his life. School became more demanding. Work responsibilities increased. His mother's financial struggles continued, and Ethan focused his energy on supporting his family however he could. Sometimes life felt unfair. He watched classmates enjoy opportunities he couldn't afford. He saw friends leave for vacations while he spent weekends working extra shifts. Yet despite the challenges, Ethan never allowed bitterness to take root in his heart. The experience with the stranger had taught him something important. It showed him that generosity is not measured by how much you have. It is measured by what you are willing to share when giving feels difficult. Years passed, and Ethan carried that lesson with him into adulthood. Whenever he encountered someone in need, he remembered how a simple act of kindness had felt more meaningful than any purchase he could have made with those $10. There were moments when he helped coworkers struggling through difficult times. There were occasions when he volunteered at community events. Sometimes he offered encouragement to people who felt discouraged. Other times he gave his time rather than money. The details were different, but the principle remained the same. He helped because he understood how powerful compassion could be. One of the most remarkable things about Ethan was that he never expected anything in return. Many people approach kindness like a transaction. They help others while secretly hoping for recognition, rewards, or future benefits. Ethan viewed it differently. He believed that if kindness came with expectations attached, it lost part of its meaning. The stranger from the bus stop had disappeared from his life completely. Ethan didn't know his name, where he came from, or what happened after that day. For all he knew, he would never see him again. As the years continued passing, the memory became little more than a distant story tucked away in his mind. He occasionally thought about the stranger and hoped things had improved for him, but life kept moving forward. New responsibilities emerged. New goals demanded attention. Ethan graduated, pursued career opportunities, and worked tirelessly to create a better future. Through every challenge and every achievement, he never realized that somewhere out there, another person carried the memory of that rainy afternoon just as clearly as he did. While Ethan had almost forgotten the encounter, the stranger had never forgotten the teenager who gave away his last $10 when nobody else was willing. 10 years passed faster than Ethan could have imagined. The teenager who once walked through the rain with only $10 in his pocket was now a young man carrying responsibilities, ambitions, and dreams of his own. Life had changed in many ways, but it had not become easy. Success did not arrive overnight. There were no shortcuts, lucky breaks, or miracle opportunities waiting around the corner. Everything Ethan achieved came through determination, sacrifice, and years of relentless effort. After graduating from high school, Ethan worked multiple jobs while attending college classes whenever he could afford them. Some semesters he had to pause his education because money was tight. Other times he spent long nights studying after exhausting shifts at work. While many of his friends enjoyed social events and free weekends, Ethan focused on building a future. He remembered the struggles he and his mother had endured, and he promised himself that one day he would create a better life for both of them. That promise became his motivation whenever he felt like giving up. As the years went by, Ethan slowly built valuable skills and gained experience in business management. His hard work eventually led him to start a small company. At first, things looked promising. He poured his savings into the business, worked countless hours, and dedicated himself completely to making it succeed. For a while it seemed as though his efforts were finally paying off. New clients arrived, revenue increased, and he began imagining a future where financial worries would no longer control his life. Then everything started going wrong. An economic downturn hit the local market. Several major clients canceled contracts without warning. Expenses increased while income declined. Month after month, the company struggled to stay afloat. Ethan worked harder than ever, hoping persistence would solve the problem, but the challenges continued growing. Soon, he found himself facing the possibility of losing everything he had spent years building. The stress became overwhelming. Every morning he woke up thinking about unpaid invoices, shrinking bank accounts, and employees depending on him for their livelihoods. Every night he lay awake wondering what he could do differently. The confidence that once fueled his ambitions slowly began turning into doubt. For the first time in years, he questioned whether all his sacrifices had been worth it. One evening, after a particularly difficult day, Ethan sat alone in his office long after everyone else had left. Papers covered his desk. Financial reports painted a discouraging picture. He felt trapped between responsibility and uncertainty. As he stared at the numbers, his phone buzzed with an unfamiliar email notification. Normally, he would have ignored it until morning, but something about the message caught his attention. The subject line simply read, "You may not remember me." Confused, Ethan opened the email. The message was brief but intriguing. The sender claimed they had been searching for him for years. They mentioned a rainy afternoon, a bus stop, and $10. Ethan froze. Suddenly, memories he hadn't thought about in years came rushing back. The stranger, the rain, the money he had given away as a teenager. His heart began racing as he continued reading. The sender explained that they had never forgotten what happened that day. They wrote about how that simple act of kindness had arrived during one of the darkest moments of their life. They also revealed that they would be visiting Ethan's city in a few days and wanted to meet him in person. Sitting alone in his office, Ethan stared at the screen in disbelief. After an entire decade, a moment he thought had disappeared into the past was suddenly returning to his life in a way he never expected. The days leading up to the meeting felt strangely unreal to Ethan. Even after reading the email multiple times, he struggled to believe that the stranger from 10 years ago had somehow found him. Questions filled his mind. What had happened to the man after that rainy afternoon? How had he tracked him down after so many years? And most importantly, why now? The mystery followed him everywhere. At work, during meals, and even late at night when he tried to sleep, his thoughts kept returning to that unexpected message. Finally, the day arrived. The stranger had invited Ethan to meet him at a small restaurant downtown. Ethan arrived early, nervous and curious. As he sat waiting, he wondered whether he would even recognize the man. 10 years was a long time. People changed. Lives changed. Perhaps the stranger had simply wanted to say thank you. Perhaps he wanted to share his story. Ethan never imagined what was actually about to happen. A few minutes later, a well-dressed man entered the restaurant and immediately smiled when he saw Ethan. There was confidence in his posture and warmth in his expression. As he approached the table, Ethan searched his face for traces of the exhausted stranger he had met years earlier. Then he saw it. The eyes were the same. The smile was the same. Suddenly, the memories connected. The man introduced himself as Daniel and thanked Ethan for agreeing to meet. They spent hours talking. Daniel shared the story of what happened after that rainy afternoon. He explained that when Ethan had given him those $10, he had been at the lowest point of his life. He had lost his job, exhausted his savings, and begun losing faith in people. More than the money itself, it was Ethan's compassion that changed him. A struggling teenager had shown kindness when countless others had walked past without stopping. That moment reminded Daniel that goodness still existed in the world. Inspired by that encounter, Daniel refused to give up. He used the money to buy food, regain his strength, and continue searching for opportunities. Within days, he secured temporary work. Over time, that work led to better opportunities, and eventually he started his own business. Through years of dedication and perseverance, the company grew into a highly successful enterprise. Yet throughout his journey, he never forgot the teenager who had helped him when nobody else would. Daniel explained that he had spent years trying to find Ethan. The search wasn't easy because he knew very little about him. But he remained determined because he wanted to repay a debt that had never left his heart. Then Daniel handed Ethan a folder. Confused, Ethan opened it and began reading. Inside were legal documents, business agreements, and a letter personally signed by Daniel. As Ethan continued reading, his eyes widened with disbelief. Daniel had decided to invest a substantial amount of money into Ethan's struggling company. The investment was large enough to save the business, protect the employees, and provide the resources needed for future growth. Ethan sat speechless as he realized what was happening. Tears filled his eyes as he looked across the table. 10 years earlier, he had given away his last $10 without expecting anything in return. He never imagined that simple act of kindness would travel through an entire decade and return in such an extraordinary way. In that moment, Ethan understood something powerful. Kindness is never truly lost. Every act of compassion leaves a mark on someone's life, and sometimes those marks continue creating miracles long after the original moment has passed. As he shook Daniel's hand, Ethan realized that the greatest surprise wasn't the investment, the success, or the opportunity. The greatest surprise was discovering that one small decision made in the rain had connected two lives forever. Ethan's story reminds us that the true value of kindness is not measured by the amount we give, but by the heart behind the act. As a teenager struggling to help his own family, he had every reason to keep those last $10 for himself. No one would have blamed him if he had walked past that stranger and continued on his way. Yet he chose compassion over convenience and generosity over self-interest. At the time, it seemed like a small and ordinary decision, one that would likely be forgotten as life moved forward. But what Ethan didn't know was that his kindness arrived at exactly the right moment in another person's life, and became the spark that reignited hope when it was almost gone. 10 years later, when Ethan found himself facing his own difficult season, that same act of kindness returned in a way he could never have imagined. His journey teaches us that every action matters, even when the results are invisible. The encouragement we offer, the help we provide, and the compassion we show can create ripple effects that travel far beyond our sight. We may never know how deeply our actions impact others, but every act of goodness leaves a mark on the world. Ethan's story is proof that kindness is never wasted, that character is revealed during difficult times, and that the seeds we plant today may grow into blessings years later. Sometimes the smallest gesture can change a life, And sometimes the kindness we give without expectation becomes the very thing that transforms our future when we need it most.